Well, welcome everybody. Bienvenidos a todos y todas. Welcome to our next installment of the Agrivoltaics Sin Fronteras presentation series. Today we're covering the topic of ecovoltaics, which we'll hear about from two presenters that we will introduce as they are coming up. I'm Greg Barron-Gafford from the University of Arizona, co-moderating today with Dr. Marcia from Chile.
Marcia Montedónico de la Universidad de Chile. Bienvenidos todos y todas. Gracias por estar acá en este nuevo webinar de ecovoltaicos. El doctor Juan Andrés Pinos es investigador asociado en la Facultad de Life Science de la Universidad de Nevada, Las Vegas. Se doctoró en Ecología Terrestre por la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona y trabajó en colaboración con el Consejo Superior de Investigaciones Científicas. Su investigación se centra en estudios de campo sobre procesos ecohidrológicos de las plantas, con especial énfasis en la distribución de la precipitación por la vegetación desde perspectivas hidrológicas y biogeoquímicas. Una segunda línea de investigación emergente explora la sinergia entre el desarrollo de la energía solar y la conservación ecológica conocida como ecovoltaicos. Damos la bienvenida entonces a Juan Andrés y por favor comparte tu presentación.
Listo, un momento. ¿Podéis ver mi presentación ahora?
Sí, la podemos ver, pero no está en pantalla completa todavía. Ahí sí. Ahí está perfecto.
Vale.
Bien, les pedimos que apaguen sus micrófonos mientras Juan Andrés habla. Adelante.
Ok, muchas gracias. Gracias por la oportunidad de participar en esta serie de seminarios. Espero escuchar sus preguntas y comentarios al final de esta presentación. Como mencionó Marcia, mi nombre es Juan Pinos y soy un investigador asociado en la Universidad de Nevada, Las Vegas. Soy parte de un proyecto que busca entender el impacto de las instalaciones ecovoltaicas en el microclima local en ecosistemas desérticos. Como punto de partida, es importante mencionar que los desiertos tienen un alto potencial solar y tienen una gran disponibilidad de superficie, por lo cual un sinnúmero de instalaciones fotovoltaicas se han construido en este ecosistema. ¿Por qué se ha permitido esto? Los desiertos, como podemos ver en la fotografía superior, se consideraban tierras estériles y con poco valor ecológico. Hoy en día sabemos que esto no es verdad. Los desiertos albergan una gran diversidad biológica de plantas, mamíferos, reptiles, aves, etc. Y por otro lado, los desiertos son un ecosistema frágil, ya que puede tomar décadas o incluso siglos recuperarse de perturbaciones, ya sean antropogénicas o naturales. Las instalaciones...
Perdón, Juan, perdón por interrumpirte, pero parece que no está funcionando la traducción. No sé si alguien lo puede escuchar en inglés a Juan. Someone can hear Juan in English? No. Juan, ¿activaste tu traducción? ¿Pusiste el idioma en que preferías hablar?
Oh, no, ahora lo hago. Creo que me
Tienes que hacerlo porque si no, no te traduce la... Aquí, yes. Ah, dice no traducirme, ya. Put it Spanish. Ok, traducirme. Great. Ya. Ahora debería funcionar.
Ok.
Continúa.
Una disculpa, no sabía que yo también lo tenía que hacer. Ok. Entonces, las instalaciones fotovoltaicas tradicionales que se han construido en el desierto generalmente se han enfocado en la generación de energía sin considerar el funcionamiento natural del ecosistema, como por ejemplo la hidrología, o tampoco considerando los impactos a la biodiversidad, Un ejemplo es la alteración del hábitat y la pérdida de conectividad ecológica. ¿Por qué sucede esto? En la fotografía podemos observar la instalación solar Copper Mountain en Boulder City, al sur de Nevada. Aquí la vegetación ha sido removida completamente de toda la superficie y el suelo ha sido nivelado previo a la instalación de los paneles solares. Este cambio abrupto de uso de suelo altera las funciones ecohidrológicas naturales del ecosistema desértico. Y esto provoca subsecuentes alteraciones como el cambio del microclima local. Otro aspecto es la tecnología de los paneles solares. Usualmente estas instalaciones fotovoltaicas tradicionales usan paneles fijos y monofaciales. Quiere decir que son estacionarios, que no se mueven y que solo capturan radiación directa en la cara frontal del panel. En este contexto surge la ecovoltaica de desiertos, que es un enfoque novedoso que busca priorizar simultáneamente la generación de energía y la conservación del ecosistema. Esta definición es ligeramente distinta del enfoque clásico de ecovoltaica, que generalmente se enfoca en maximizar los servicios ecosistémicos o la restauración ecológica. En cambio, la ecovoltaica en desiertos busca mantener tanto la biodiversidad como el funcionamiento ecológico lo más cercano posible a las condiciones propias, naturales de este ecosistema. Otro componente interesante de este enfoque es el uso de tecnologías más modernas, tecnologías fotovoltaicas, de las cuales hablaré más adelante. Sin embargo, la ecovoltaica es un concepto relativamente nuevo y todavía ha sido muy poco estudiado. Con el apoyo del Bureau of Land Management de los Estados Unidos, el proyecto solar Gemini representa una instalación pionera al implementar este modelo ecovoltaico. Gemini se ubica en el noreste del desierto del Mojave, al sur de Nevada, y es una de las instalaciones fotovoltaicas más grandes de los Estados Unidos. Fue diseñada como una instalación ecovoltaica con el objetivo de preservar el ambiente, el hábitat de la tortuga del desierto y de otras especies nativas, como es el Three Corner Milkweed, que es la plantita que vemos aquí. Pero ¿por qué Gemini se considera una instalación ecovoltaica? Primero, por sus métodos de instalación. En Gemini se mantuvieron intactos la vegetación y el suelo en aproximadamente el 50% de toda la superficie de la instalación fotovoltaica, como se observa en las dos primeras fotografías. En el otro 50%, la perturbación fue relativamente leve y consistió principalmente en el aplastamiento de la vegetación y la compactación parcial del suelo por el tránsito de vehículos en las filas donde se instalaron los paneles solares. La figura de la derecha representa este proceso de perturbación. La vegetación, que está compuesta principalmente de matorrales y hierbas, se espera que se recupere relativamente rápido al aplastamiento de los vehículos. Esto reduce enormemente el impacto ecológico en comparación con instalaciones fotovoltaicas tradicionales que vimos anteriormente, donde toda la vegetación es removida y todo el suelo es nivelado previo a la instalación de los paneles solares. Otro aspecto interesante que hace único a Gemini es la tecnología que utiliza. Gemini emplea sistemas automáticos de seguimiento solar de un solo eje, en donde los paneles se mueven de este a oeste a lo largo del día para maximizar la captura de radiación solar. Gemini también utiliza paneles bifaciales. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Que los paneles capturan la radiación directa en la cara frontal y la radiación reflejada en la cara posterior, lo que aumenta considerablemente la eficiencia energética. Con todos estos novedosos elementos, surge la pregunta central de este estudio, que es ¿qué impacto tienen las instalaciones ecovoltaicas sobre el microclima local? Queremos entender si estos sistemas generan efectos positivos, negativos o moderados en comparación con las instalaciones fotovoltaicas tradicionales. Y cabe mencionar que nos enfocamos primero en el microclima porque las condiciones ambientales son las que inicialmente controlan la respuesta de la biodiversidad. Por ejemplo, si queremos comprender los posibles cambios en la vegetación o la actividad de los animales, necesitamos primero entender cómo cambian las condiciones ambientales. Y para esto hemos instalado una red de estaciones de monitoreo distribuidas en 4 micrositios dentro de la instalación de Gemini. Correspondientemente es la línea de goteo del panel en el lado oeste, debajo del panel, en la línea de goteo este, en los espacios entre líneas de paneles, y también una ubicación fuera de la instalación a 2 kilómetros de distancia que sirve como zona de control, ya que es una zona de desierto no perturbado. Con este diseño monitoreamos meteorología, temperatura superficial y subsuperficial del suelo y humedad de suelo en todas las ubicaciones. ¿Qué es lo que hemos encontrado? Encontramos nuevos microclimas. La figura de la izquierda muestra la radiación solar para las distintas ubicaciones y la de la derecha muestra los patrones diarios. Entonces, la radiación solar fue menor debajo de los paneles, seguida por las líneas de goteo, los espacios entre paneles y finalmente en la zona de control. Es de esperar que la radiación debajo de los paneles sea baja porque esta zona está bloqueada o sombreada casi todo el día por la presencia física de los paneles, y la pequeña radiación que medimos corresponde a radiación difusa. En las líneas de goteo reciben sombra parcial durante el día debido al movimiento de los paneles, y aquí la línea en esta dinámica, la línea de goteo este tiene mayor radiación en la mañana y la línea oeste tiene mayor radiación en la tarde. Los espacios entre paneles, al ser zonas descubiertas, reciben radiación continua durante el día. En general, dentro de la instalación fotovoltaica, refiriéndome a los 4 micrositios, la radiación solar fue menor que en la zona de control. Incluso los espacios entre paneles, que son zonas abiertas también descubiertas, tuvieron ligeramente menos radiación que las zonas de control. La pregunta que viene aquí es, ¿por qué? Si ambas zonas son zonas descubiertas o como llamamos es desierto abierto. Y la respuesta es que durante ciertos momentos del día los paneles generan sombra sobre los espacios entre paneles. Cuando alcanzan su máxima inclinación, aquí tenemos un ejemplo en la fotografía, se observa la sombra en la mañana cuando los paneles están orientados hacia el este, y si hablamos de los patrones diarios de radiación, en la figura inferior, las líneas verdes corresponden a las zonas, a los espacios entre paneles, y la magenta corresponde a la zona de control. Aquí podemos observar pequeñas reducciones de radiación en la mañana y en la tarde, que corresponde a los momentos que los paneles están en su máxima inclinación al este y al oeste. Y este fenómeno ocurre tanto en el verano como en el invierno. Ahora, en términos de temperatura del aire, sorprendentemente no observamos diferencias en la temperatura del aire entre las ubicaciones, y esto es un resultado muy importante. Al decir que no hubo cambios en la temperatura dentro de la instalación Gemini, comparado con la temperatura del aire en la zona de control, que es el desierto natural, y esto en otras palabras quiere decir que no observamos el llamado efecto de isla de calor. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Un estudio en 2016 encontró que las instalaciones fotovoltaicas retienen calor, lo que incrementa la temperatura nocturna. ¿Por qué encontramos esta diferencia? Las instalaciones estudiadas en este trabajo eran instalaciones fotovoltaicas tradicionales, donde la vegetación fue completamente removida, por lo tanto no existía un enfriamiento por transpiración de la vegetación, y además usaban paneles fijos monofaciales. Solo capturaban la radiación directa, lo que provoca que mayor radiación sea absorbida y retenida por el suelo, mientras que los paneles actúan como barreras que retienen la radiación difusa. Esto explica el aumento de temperatura que se observó en este estudio. En este sentido, la instalación ecovoltaica de Gemini, que mantiene la vegetación y utiliza paneles bifaciales con sistemas de seguimiento solar, tienen un efecto de moderación sobre la temperatura del aire. Ahora, resultados en términos de humedad de suelo. En la figura podemos observar la humedad de suelo a 10, 20 y 40 centímetros de profundidad en las distintas ubicaciones. Aquí la humedad fue mayor dentro de la instalación fotovoltaica que en la zona de control. Y dentro de la instalación fue mayor en la línea de goteo oeste. Esto indica que la mayor parte de la precipitación que es interceptada por los paneles ocurre cuando están orientados al oeste en la tarde. Esto es un patrón típico de tormentas convectivas en el desierto del Mojave. Y algo interesante es que la línea de goteo, al interceptar mayor cantidad de lluvia, acumula mayor volumen de agua e incrementa la energía cinética con la que cae, generando erosión en esta zona. En esta fotografía podemos observar con más detalle la erosión causada. Este efecto ocurre tan solo tras 2 años de funcionamiento de la instalación Gemini, lo que sugiere que a largo plazo podrían formarse surcos de erosión y a su vez esto podría aumentar el estrés para las plantas que crecen en la línea de goteo. En términos de temperatura del suelo, observamos que la temperatura del suelo fue mayor dentro de la instalación comparado con la zona de control, y dentro de la instalación fue mayor debajo del panel. A primera vista esto parece un resultado contradictorio. ¿Por qué las zonas debajo del panel, que son zonas sombreadas, tienen temperaturas de suelo mayores que el desierto que está descubierto? Y la respuesta hay 2 razones para este fenómeno. La primera es que los paneles bifaciales, por más eficientes que sean, interceptan grandes cantidades de radiación que no pueden convertir en energía. Por lo tanto, el panel, para mantenerse eficiente y frío, libera este exceso de radiación en forma de calor, tanto como para el aire como para el suelo, en las 2 direcciones del panel. Y la segunda explicación es que en los suelos arenosos secos, la transmisión de calor, la conducción de calor, se produce solamente en los puntos de contacto. Pero aquí ocurre algo muy interesante. A medida que aumenta la humedad del suelo, el agua se adhiere a las partículas, lo que crea puentes de agua. Y estos puentes de agua aumentan la conductividad térmica del suelo. ¿Por qué? Porque al aumentar la humedad del suelo, aumenta la retención y la transmisión de calor. Entonces, tenemos el calor liberado por los paneles, por la parte posterior que llega hacia el suelo, y tenemos un suelo más húmedo dentro de la instalación solar, especialmente debajo de los paneles, comparado contra la zona de control. Y esto explica las temperaturas más altas observadas. En términos de microclima para los arbustos, encontramos que la superficie del dosel de los arbustos es ligeramente, la temperatura es ligeramente más alta, especialmente en los arbustos que están ubicados debajo de los paneles. Esto podría estar generando un estrés térmico que consecuentemente podría tener un incremento potencial en la transpiración para que el arbusto tenga el efecto de enfriamiento. Y esto a su vez también aumenta el consumo de agua. Entonces, eso es un aspecto que estamos todavía trabajando, que necesitamos a la parte de estudios fisiológicos en sí del arbusto. Otro hallazgo interesante es que los arbustos concentran mayor humedad en el suelo comparado con las áreas de suelo descubierto. Es decir, los arbustos están funcionando como islas de fertilidad en términos de humedad de suelo dentro de las instalaciones ecovoltaicas. Y con esto el mensaje que quiero transmitir es que las nuevas instalaciones ecovoltaicas como Gemini tienen el potencial para reducir la radiación solar, moderar la temperatura del aire, pero incrementan la temperatura del suelo, lo cual podría tener efectos positivos o negativos dependiendo de la especie, y finalmente incrementa la humedad del suelo, lo que ayuda a combatir la desertificación. Esto sucede en los ecosistemas de matorral desértico del desierto del Mojave. Y con esto me gustaría terminar mi presentación agradeciendo a nuestros colaboradores del USGS, del BLM y de Primergy que han hecho posible el ingreso para mantener este estudio continuando. Continuando. Y con esto
Bien.
termino y encantado de responder cualquier pregunta.
Muchas gracias, Juan. Muchas gracias por tu presentación, dentro del tiempo, súper bien además. Si es que tienen preguntas, por favor, levanten su mano o bien escríbanla en el chat y las podemos tomar. Para comenzar, voy a abrir yo con una pregunta. Quisiera saber, Juan, si en este estudio lograron medir si hay mayor biodiversidad de especies vegetales, es decir, vieron el impacto, ¿verdad?, del microclima, de la temperatura en los arbustos, etcétera, pero se pudo observar o tienen registro si hubo mayor vegetación en las distintas zonificaciones que hacen bajo los paneles o en el suelo. ¿Pudieron investigar sobre eso?
Gracias por la pregunta. Para responder, primero hay que considerar que la mayoría de la vegetación se mantuvo intacta y una pequeña parte fue la que sufrió el aplastamiento por los vehículos. Entonces, obviamente hay una reducción en la cobertura vegetal preconstrucción comparado con postconstrucción. Es muy difícil medir en términos de vegetación arbustiva, de matorral, porque tiene una tasa de crecimiento extremadamente lenta, pero por otro lado tenemos el incremento de especies de hierbas, de grasses, invasive grasses, que han aumentado justamente en las zonas donde ha habido la compactación o perturbación del suelo. Estas especies aprovechan estas pequeñas perturbaciones para aumentar en población y en densidad. Pero en sí, decir en la ciencia cierta si es que hay una recuperación o un aumento de la vegetación, eso es algo que debería estudiarse a largo plazo. Con 1 o 2 años de funcionamiento no podremos ver ningún efecto todavía en términos de vegetación.
Perfecto, muchas gracias. ¿Tiene la mano levantada Davis? Por favor, Davis, si quieres hacer tu pregunta.
Sí, gracias, Marcia. Muy bueno tu investigación, Juan. Felicitaciones. Creo que más o menos contestaste la pregunta que tengo, pero ¿tú tienes alguna indicación de cómo esta aproximación, cómo esta red ecovoltaica puede generar, puede ayudar o puede fomentar más incendios forestales, que esa área en los últimos años ha tenido bastante efecto los incendios forestales en el área? Ese es uno, y tú algo hablaste sobre las gramas. Entonces creo que por ahí tú más o menos contestaste. La otra pregunta, vi un creosote bush en tus fotos. ¿Has hecho algún tipo de investigación ecofisiológica en los creosote, potencial del agua, stomatal conductance o de la conductance de la estomata, para ver la diferencia entre el control y los creosote que están debajo de los paneles?
Perdón, Davis, ¿te puedes presentar brevemente, nombre e institución?
Ok, yo soy David Blasini y yo soy un investigador postdoctoral de la Universidad de Arizona.
Gracias.
Ya, para responder a la primera pregunta, sí, las instalaciones ecovoltaicas y cualquier instalación fotovoltaica incrementa el riesgo a los incendios, bueno, ya sean naturales o antropogénicos. ¿Por qué? Porque aumentan la cantidad de invasive grasses, lo que incrementa la cantidad de biomasa. Y por otro lado, recuerden que la radiación solar es el principal factor que, que conduce a la descomposición de materia orgánica en los desiertos. Si tenemos paneles solares que están creando sombra, aunque sea dinámica, pero está incrementando la sombra la mayor parte del tiempo dentro de la instalación, esto podría cambiar las tasas de descomposición, que significa que tendríamos acumulación de biomasa debido a que estamos reduciendo la radiación solar que llega al suelo. Pero por otro lado, tenemos tal vez un efecto compensatorio, que es el incremento de humedad de suelo y de la temperatura del suelo, lo que aumentaría la actividad de ciertos microorganismos que ayudan a la descomposición. Y para responder a la segunda pregunta, este año hemos terminado recién la primera fase, que fue estudiar la meteorología, el cambio en el microclima, y nuestros colaboradores en el equipo del USGS están empezando a hacer los estudios de mediciones de ciertos parámetros fisiológicos de los arbustos. Así que por ahora no le tengo una respuesta exacta.
Muchas gracias, Juan. Tiene la mano levantada también Carlos Alberto Pérez. Por favor, Carlos, si puedes decir tu nombre y afiliación, y luego la pregunta.
Bueno, estamos reunidos aquí. Bueno, soy Carlos Alberto Pérez Rábago del Instituto de Energías Renovables y colaboro en el grupo del doctor Aarón Sánchez Juárez, que él es el que quiere hacer la pregunta. Entonces, le paso la voz a Aarón.
Perdón, buenas tardes por allá. Mi nombre es Aarón Sánchez Juárez. Tenemos bastante tiempo trabajando en colaboración con varias instituciones y sobre todo empezamos nuestra colaboración con el doctor Greg Barro por ahí del 2021 para la implementación de un proyecto agrovoltaico acá en la Ciudad de México. Juan, es realmente interesante ver tus resultados y claro, estás tratando de entender pues prácticamente cómo se comportan ciertos parámetros ambientales, tanto fuera como debajo de la cubierta fotovoltaica. Mi pregunta es, ¿tu análisis de temperatura del suelo, así como de humedad, son valores promedios en un ciclo de tiempo dado al día? ¿O cómo estás manejando este conjunto de datos que realmente pues a veces es un poquito no fácil de entender o de analizar?
Sí, mucho gusto y muchas gracias por la pregunta. Los sensores que tenemos instalados de humedad, tanto de humedad del suelo como de temperatura, están midiendo estas variables en continuo. Es decir, que tenemos mediciones cada 15 minutos. Para hacer más fácil la interpretación de los resultados, aquí están los promedios de toda la serie de tiempo. Pero, por supuesto, que hay patrones, primero estacionales y segundo diurnos. Hay cambios cuando llega el pico de radiación a mediodía, comparado con la noche, cuando no tenemos radiación, y asimismo cuando es la época del monzón, la época de lluvias, contra la época seca. Sí tenemos esto analizado, tenemos 2 artículos que están recién publicados, pero por temas de tiempo y facilidad no he incluido las series de tiempo aquí. Pero encantado de discutir cualquier pregunta en más detalle por correo o después de la reunión.
Ok, ya para la última pregunta de Juan Omar Molina, que está en el chat. ¿Se midió el albedo del suelo? Si fue así, ¿cuál es su valor? Juan,
Es que escucho los 2 idiomas a la vez y no entiendo
tienes
muy
que
bien.
poner idioma original. Pregunta si se midió el albedo del suelo.
Un segundo, solo cambio la voz para ya no traducir.
Tienes
Creo
que modificar en el que escuchas. Ok.
¿Podrían repetir,
Bien.
por favor, la pregunta?
Si se midió el albedo del suelo.
No, nosotros no medimos el
No se
albedo
midió.
del suelo.
Ok. Bueno, muchas gracias, Juan. Con esto, un aplauso y muchas gracias por tu presentación. Ahora damos paso a la segunda presentación de la jornada. Por favor, Greg.
Tengo
Am,
que dejar de compartir, disculpen.
sí, ya no estás compartiendo. Entiendo que
Yes.
está mi pantalla. Sí.
¿Sí? Ok.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that, Juan. Very interesting, very exciting to actually see the impacts of ecovoltaics, even in a compacted, semi-compacted situation, to get rid of that heat island effect that we've measured in other places. So very exciting. With our second talk, we're going to hear from Matthew O'Neill. Matthew is a professor and the Henry Wallace Chair for Sustainable Agriculture in the Department of Plant Pathology, Entomology, and Microbiology at Iowa State University. Matthew's work focuses on sustainable pest management, beneficial insects, pollinator conservation, and the ecological interactions between ag and biodiversity. And since 2020, he's expanded that work into agrivoltaics through research on pollinator habitat, wild bee conservation, and crop production in photovoltaic systems. His work is part of a public-private partnership at the Iowa State University, exploring agrivoltaic practices within a utility-scale solar farm that's integrating food production, beekeeping, and biodiversity conservation. At this point, he's published more than 100 scientific articles and book chapters. He's really actively involved in teaching, graduate education, outreach on sustainable agriculture, and as part of the conversation we've been having globally about how to create a global school of agrivoltaics, especially with his contributions from this ecovoltaic and pollinator side of things. So with that, we're excited to now hear from a different perspective of ecovoltaics work from Matthew.
So I don't speak Spanish. I tried to translate all my slides to Spanish. Thank you, Google. So maybe the next slide. So I think I want to start with the question of what is the problem? And for us, next slide, for us who are studying bees, there's 2 big problems. For honeybees, it is a decline in their productivity in North America. We've seen this over the last 30 years. the number of bee colonies in the United States and in Iowa, where I live, is constant, but the production of honey from those colonies has been going down since the 1989. That's okay. Next slide. The challenges that honeybees are experiencing are also being experienced by all bees, wild bees, and people who study bees have described three big sources of stress: limited floral resources, diseases, and pesticide exposure, in this paper that was published in Science in 2015. The limited floral resources is at the top. If the bees can't feed, they will suffer from all the other stressors. In my part of the world, 75% of the land is committed to corn and soybean production. There's very little flowers left for the bees to feed on after soybeans are done flowering. So, next slide. What's the solution? Some very clever people working for the Department of Energy and several other labs published this paper a couple years ago. If you build it, they will come. And they studied how to put native flowering plants into solar farms to see if native bees would find their way to the farm. Next slide. To make a long story very short, they established native flowering plants, like you see in this picture, and they followed the abundance of native bees at these solar farms. And over time, they saw an increase in native bee abundance in these farms, not far from Iowa, where I live. Next slide. So the question is, can we repeat this in the state of Iowa, where much of the land is committed to corn and soybean production? And starting in 2023, we partnered with a utility company to build a 10-acre solar farm using utility scale designs. This is at the start of the project after the site had been built. Next slide. Working with a team of scientists, we received money from the Department of Energy to ask if different types of agrivoltaic and ecovoltaic practices could be environmentally and economically sustainable. I'm going to talk about the first task, the combination of horticulture, vegetation, and beekeeping at the solar farm, and see how well that works over time. There's several other tasks that are being done. I don't have time to go into those. Be happy to share later. Next slide. I forgot what this is in English. Yeah, so can we practice beekeeping at solar farms with honeybees? Does the honeybee productivity increase? Next slide. So we not only worked at the solar farm at our campus, but at two other solar farms. These are more or less the same size, 4 to 6 hectares in size, utility scale designs generating 1.375 to over 2 megawatts of energy. At each of these farms, we placed honeybees. Next slide. We randomly selected from a larger group of bees, put those colonies at each of the farms. The middle picture here is the start of the summer. There are 4 separate colonies. We tracked their growth over the summer, and in August, we blow the bees out of the boxes and harvest the boxes containing the honey. Next slide. Those boxes individually are extracted. The honey is extracted from them, and we can measure how productive the bees are at the different farms. Next slide. We've done this now in 2 years. These are the results. The y-axis is the average honey yield per colony in kilograms. We have the 3 farms on the x-axis. Ivy and SunSmart are 2 of the solar farms that we found. You can see that their production was constant over the 2 years. Our farm, the Alliant Energy farm, was similar to the other two in 2024, but if you advance it, you see the results from last year. This is a 400% increase in productivity. That 65 kilograms per colony is twice the national average. This is, I think, fairly remarkable. It's some of the highest yields we've ever seen for honeybees in our part of the world in the last 30 years. Next slide. Okay. Oh, and this is what they looked like before the harvest. You can see the extra boxes that have been added to them to allow the bees to collect the honey and store it. So what is the difference between these three sites? Why is one farm different than the other? Well, the solar farm that we call High V is a typical solar farm for our landscape. It's seeded with grass and clover, and that's it. They mow the grass occasionally. The SunSmart farm in the city of Ames allows sheep to graze, and you can see a sheep there, and they do that throughout the summer. At our farm, we're practicing horticulture, the production of fruit and vegetables between the panels, and conservation, planting native perennial flowering plants that would have been found before European settlers arrived to Iowa. And as you can see in the top picture. Next slide, please. So our farm started, like you see here, as a corn and soybean field. And now today, and the next slide, we've established different types of vegetation across the entire farm. And you can start to see in this picture some of the forms of vegetation establishing and some of the forms of agriculture with the white plastic mulch used for the vegetable production. If you go to the next slide, this is a close-up. We have two different configurations of fixed tilt and a single axis tracking of two different heights. The yellow is the majority in the industry standard height. The red is a little bit higher. We also have a control plot where all the different types of vegetation are grown to see how they respond absent the panels. And then we keep our honeybees here. Next slide. So what changed in the 2 years that we've been working at our farm? Well, in the industry standard utility scale single axis tracking, we established 8 different types of vegetation. They're listed here at the top. The first 3 are vegetation to help keep the soil in place and to help with conservation of pollinators. The pollinator mix is managed in 2 different ways. One is mowed monthly, one is mowed per conservation recommendations. And then we have 5 different types of fruits and vegetables. 3 vegetables that are planted annually, an early summer harvested broccoli, a midsummer harvested squash, and then a late summer to fall bell peppers. We also have raspberries, a perennial fruit, and strawberries. These are all randomly assigned into the farm so we can assess how they grow and if those are economically viable. If you can go to the next slide. I want to talk a bit about our pollinator mix. This is 17 plants selected for a couple of reasons. One, we know them to be attractive to bees, both honeybees and wild bees. We know that they're low growing, so they won't cover the panels. Most of these are perennials, and they would be found in the native vegetation before European settlers arrived. So there's a coevolutionary relationship between these plants and our native bees. This mix is managed in 2 ways. One is a monthly mowing, typical for solar farms, and the other is per reconstruction of the native prairie. We mow it frequently in the first year, less so in the second, and then in the third year, we shouldn't have to mow it at all. Those perennial plants can outcompete the annual weeds. Next slide. We selected the 17 species so that throughout the summer there's something flowering there. This fills in gaps when our fruits and vegetables aren't flowering. I should point out that clover more or less flowers throughout the year, and it is something that our beekeepers really like because most of the honey produced in this part of the world is clover honey. Next slide. So what changed between the 2 years? Well, in each of those plots, graduate student Carl Bowling would go out twice a month and count the number of flowers. He did this in 2024 and 2025. We're just starting 2026. So the 8 treatments are on the y-axis here, and the number of flowers per treatment in July is listed in a log scale on the x-axis. And hopefully you can see the difference between one year to the next. We were counting dozens of flowers in 2024, but for some of our treatments in 2025, we're counting hundreds, if not thousands, of flowers per unit area. And this gives you a visual idea of what we're seeing. This was 2024, our first growing season. The maximum number of flowers Carl saw in one area was 1,000 flowers. It was mostly grass and weeds. This is 2025. The pollinator mix is on the left-hand side. The clover, as part of that grass and clover mix, is on the right. So again, you can kind of see the difference here. The clover is what our industry considers a default setting. The grass and clover mix was selected with help from a non-governmental organization called the Bee and Butterfly Fund, and they described it as, in their words, bulletproof, that it could establish in any location in the Midwest. It doesn't take a lot of management, and it can survive the frequent mowings that many site operators do to prevent weeds and vegetation from covering the solar panels. And as I said, yeah. Sorry. And then, oh, I forgot what this is in English. Now we're going to talk, I want to transition a little bit to the wild bees that might be visiting this site. So not only does Carl go out and count all the flowers, but he counts all of the bees and other flower visiting insects that he sees on those flowers. So in 2024, I'm going to share the results from 2024, for which we have our analyses complete. It looks like there was a difference between the area without panels versus the area with panels. We see a few more bees in the area without panels. If you go to the next slide, the bees that we're seeing in the area with panels is summarized here. We're using the same taxonomic organization that the previous paper that I showed you used. We're not collecting these, we're not destructively sampling them. I'll just point out a couple of things. Apis mellifera, 2% of the bees that we found are Apis mellifera, that's honeybees. Bombus, the 3%, those are bumblebees. Squash bees are a native bee that's co-evolved with squash plant. And then wild bees are a mix of likely 100 to 200 different species that we couldn't identify by sight on the flowers. What's really interesting, I think, are syrphid flies. Syrphid flies are flies that look like bees, and they visit flowers, but in their immature stage, they're maggots that are predatory and feed on other insects like aphids. So they're both pollinators, but also a source of pest management. Okay, so that's the community that we're seeing. If you go to the next slide, how is that pollinator abundance, the insects visiting the flower, vary by treatment? This is a summary for 2024. As you can, there was some variation, some significant variation, and overall, strawberries and squash had the most. Our pollinator mix were some of the lower performing ones. This is not surprising. This is in the first year. Those plants that we seeded, it will take them 2 to 3 years before they will develop enough biomass to produce flowers. So it's not surprising to us that we saw so little in 2024. As I showed you earlier, we saw a lot more flowers in these treatments in 2025. If you go to the next slide. We have started to do some analysis of the 2 years combined. We're seeing quite a bit of overlap between the communities that we see amongst those treatments, and it is changing by year. A couple of things to note here is in 2025, the wild bees and the syrphids, those bee mimics that provide some pest management, those are moving in different directions. They're using different parts of the solar farm. This isn't too surprising. We think the syrphids are more or less found in the crop plants, using those flowers, but then I think they're laying eggs in and around the plants where there might be pests. The wild bees tend to be found in the pollinator mix with the native plants. Go to the next slide, please. So one question that we get often from people who are interested in bee conservation is, can wild bee conservation and honeybee keeping be practiced in the same place, or will there be negative interactions? We studied this in a previous experiment and published it recently in 2022. I think if you go to the next slide, the Spanish translation is there. In this experiment, we had farms that were called high cultivation, corn and soybeans, and farms with low cultivation, fruit and vegetable farms like our solar farm. And some farms got honeybees, apiary plus, and others did not get any honeybees. And what we found was differences in the number of wild bee species, but that difference only occurred between the different levels of cultivation, not with the presence or absence of the honeybees. So we think we can have our cake and eat it too. We can practice wild bee conservation and have honeybees at the same location. And that evidence is both from what we've seen at our site, but also what we've seen at similar farms in this part of the world that aren't solar farms. Go to the next slide. Yeah, sorry, I should have advanced that. Okay, so I want to transition a little bit to what this might mean for the larger pursuit of solar power. And what we're seeing in Iowa is an interest in growing solar power. One of our other utility companies, Mid-America, has proposed 800 megawatts of solar power to be developed starting last year and into this year. It takes about 7 to 10 acres of land to generate 1 megawatt. So this is a fair amount of what will likely be farmland. But many Iowans are resistant to farmland being converted to solar power. In surveys done by Dr. Hung-Lee Fang at Iowa State University, we see a bell-shaped curve of people expressing great concern to no concern, but all of them identify a loss of farmland as an issue. What's been interesting in the last couple of years is how local governments are addressing this issue. If you advance a slide, please. So the rules for developing land for solar are at the county level, and we have 99 counties in Iowa, and each sets the rules for their county. Recently, Lynn County changed their rules for siting solar farms by including a definition of agrivoltaics that includes beekeeping. And what the rules in their zoning laws outline is a more favorable permission process if the new solar farm would include agrivoltaic practices. Go to the next slide. I think I'm at the end, and I'm at 20 minutes. I want to acknowledge Alliant Energy, the partnership that allowed us to do the work at the site, funding from the U.S. Department of Energy, our College of Ag and Life Sciences, the Wallace Chair. My email is there. Our website is there. If you have any questions that I can't answer today, please reach out. I'd be happy to help as best I can.
Great, thank you, Matt. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I'm trying to find the chat again. Oh, there already are some, but like Marcia, I will take the advantage to ask one question to get things rolling. Matt, at first, before you gave us the reasoning for why 24 to 25 was such a big jump, it had me wondering about lag times and colony development and plant development. Now that you've seen this big boom of flowers between 2024 and 2025, and do you expect there will be a continued rise, or does this plateau? Do more plants mean a bigger colony? Do you imagine a larger colony returning year to year such that you get this feed forward kind of response?
So think of honeybees as livestock, and they're managed throughout the year. So we have to overwinter our bees and keep them alive during winter. So their size decreases. The number of workers they have in the colony decreases as they try to survive the winter. So year to year, the honeybee colonies are the same size. And I left this out, I apologize. We start all of our bees at the same size so that they're all equal across the 3 locations. So there's no like carryover effect from one year to the next. They're all the same size. But for wild bees, it's a different story. And in our part of the world, almost all the land is used for corn and soybeans, and that ground is left bare for 8 months out of the year. And it's often tilled. So that has a huge impact on wild bees, of which 80% are ground nesting. So our solar farms that are left undisturbed may be a really good place not only for flowering resources, but also for ground nesting. I didn't tell you this, but in our data from 2025, we saw about 10 times more bumblebees in 2025 than we did in 2024. And that's interesting because bumblebees are ground nesting, whereas honeybees are kept inside those colonies.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, you got my next question, which was going to be about the fact that we do have bees that would love an undisturbed understory. So great. Marcia, is that you with the question?
Sí, ¿me entiendes, Matthew? Si hablo español, ¿tienes la traducción activada? Do you have the translation? Yeah. So I'm going to ask in Spanish and then in English. Respecto de, ustedes tienen horticultura y también vegetación nativa para los polinizadores. ¿Cómo armonizan el manejo de ambas cosas? Es decir, los cultivos requieren maquinaria, no sé si hacen fertilización o otro tipo de cosecha. ¿Cómo pueden convivir ambas vegetaciones y no dañar a los polinizadores? Did you understand? Or yeah.
Yeah, I do understand. That's a good question. Greg, I wonder if you could go back to the slides.
Yep.
And show the plot map. So there's I think 2 ways to answer your question, Marcia. One is spatially, where are these treatments located? So we set up an experiment where we have 3. So this is a map of our single access tracking utility scale portion of the farm. It's about 5 acres, and the rows, each number is an experimental unit, and that's each experimental unit is about 60 feet long by 30 feet wide. And the different types of vegetation are on either side of a row of panels. So the red is strawberries, and that is spatially separate from the grass and clover, which is gray, and the different pollinator mixes. So the production is separate from each other. Now, there are other, so the bees find their way to these locations, and we count if they're there. For the honeybees, we pull the pollen off of the bee to know what plants they're using. For the wild bees, we just have to look on the flowers to see if they're there. But there's another way to answer your question, which is, does the practice of agriculture, any of the agriculture that we do in this farm, negatively affect the bees? We've tried to limit pesticide use, but at some point we've had to use insecticides for some of the plots. And we do so using integrated pest management. And to date, we haven't observed any problems from that. And that's consistent with the previous work we've published, where if farmers are thoughtful about the use of pesticides and they're not spraying them such that they drift onto the flowering plants, then we both can coexist. And that's a much larger story to tell you that involves some of the other work we do at Iowa State, trying to place perennial native flowering vegetation back into our larger landscape. And we found that we can do that even when the adjacent farm is using pesticides. Sorry, that's a little off the solar.
Thank you, Matthew. In the chat, there is a compliment from the team at RAME, which is a agrivoltaics consortium out of Mexico. But they also are asking a question. What type of material are the solar panel structures made from? The actual piles and everything. Have the structures had to undergo any kind of maintenance that prevents damage from the vegetation?
Yeah, maybe there's a picture. Oh, shoot. I hope I had. Yeah, this is actually, if you stay there for a second, the first picture, the typical solar, that's our solar farm. So we're using steel pylons to hold the panels in place. The solar panels are bifacial, very much what the previous speaker described. It's a standard solar panel, standard configuration for utility scale solar farms throughout the Midwest. There hasn't been any specific management beyond mowing to prevent the vegetation from affecting the panels. This year, we've had a problem. We're having a problem with a herbicide-resistant weed, Canada thistle, and we've had to go in and selectively spray certain locations where the thistle is surviving despite the mowing, or in absence of the mowing in our pollinator mix. But other than that, the management is the same as any other solar farm, even if there wasn't farmers there. And one story, one anecdote we have from the utility company is they like our students being there farming because they're basically there every day. And if something does go wrong, they immediately tell the solar company. So we had a tornado come through and tear some of the panels off of the mounts. The students were there the next day, called the company, told them where they were, and it sped up their repairs.
Right, response time.
Yeah.
Great. Again, if anybody has questions, please put them in the chat, or just raise your hand because of the translation, which I believe is still working. But we only have an hour, so it will stop. You should still be able to have translational assistance, so please feel free to do so. In the absence of that, Matt, I know a question that we've been on the same phone call about with solar companies is, do you know if there's any benefit to the farms outside of the solar array of there being beekeeping within a solar array. So if in our Google Meet windows, if Marcia is next door, does she benefit from there being ecovoltaics on your parcel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have any data on that yet. We're starting to measure this summer the spillover of the bees that, not just the honeybees, but the wild bees that would come from the solar farm and move into the adjacent farm. Yeah, it's an interesting question because soybeans are a main crop in Iowa, and there's some evidence that even though soybeans are bred to be self-pollinated, their yields improve when they're visited by bees. So there's interest by soybean farmers about how they might use honeybees or conserve wild bees to improve their soybean yields. I don't know if that's happening. It's a really interesting, but it's also kind of a tricky problem to solve because there are insects that help improve soybean yield, but there are also insects that reduce soybean yield.
Right.
And one thing we've noticed is in similar experiments, the insect pests from conservation, insect pests in soybean fields are not increased when we use native perennial plants in conservation practices adjacent to the crop. So we're not making the situation worse. I don't know if we're making it better.
Cool. Well, at least not making it worse is a good start. And Marcia, I believe, has added a question that I think we could ask both you and Juan. We find it to be a challenge to get these kinds of data, but do either of you see any difference in energy generation in terms of kilowatts on a smaller scale related to, at Matthew's case, different crops that are being grown, or at Juan's case, in ecovoltaics versus areas that don't have any vegetation underneath them? Juan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to speak in Spanish, sorry. Sí, lamentablemente no tenemos acceso a esta información. Es información reservada de Primergy, y lo quisimos comparar con otras instalaciones fotovoltaicas tradicionales, pero es información sensible que realmente el acceso es muy limitado. Así que no tengo una respuesta para esto.
Got it. I didn't think so. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I actually wanted to hear if I would be surprised that you did have this information, but also to relay to all of the industry people who might be watching to maybe open the door a little bit more in terms of this collaboration and answering this question, which comes up so often. One challenge is just the scale at which energy is being measured. Matthew, do you have any insights? You're on mute, I think.
Yeah. Again, if I could ask you to go back to the slides, I left this detail out. I think it's at the very end after the acknowledgements. So we worked with our industry partner to help design the site so that we could get at this question about if the vegetation affects the solar panels. And if we keep going, yeah, so maybe stay right here. So we designed our experiment such that every experimental unit has vegetation on either side of a row of panels. And the solar company, with the engineers that built the site, put string inverters to assess the amount of energy produced along a row of 17 panels. That's what it was supposed to do on paper. What it's actually doing is not quite there, but we have the capacity for some of our experimental units to account for the energy being produced by the panels that are bordered either side by the vegetation. It is a lot of data because the energy data comes in at like minute intervals and it's running continuously. We've done some preliminary analysis, and we can basically see that, yeah, the fixed tilt produced less energy than the single axis tracking. We don't see a lot of difference in the height, But we also don't seem to see a lot of variation across the different types of vegetation. However, we haven't really looked in great detail at times of the year and times of the day when, if there were a vegetation effect, we could see it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not Arizona, we're not Mexico. We get hot, but we don't get Arizona hot. So one of the challenges for our team is to go deep into the data and see if in those extreme conditions we can see an effect of the vegetation.
Great, thank you.
But to be clear, probably not going to be a huge effect.
I have a question for Matt. Okay, de nuevo, cambio al español. Matt, ¿has pensado, este es un tema que recién se está escuchando, en el caso de la ecovoltaica en desierto, cuando hablamos del fin de la vida útil de la instalación, en nuestro caso hay la posibilidad de que los paneles se reemplacen con paneles más modernos de aquí a 10 o 20 años, o que se retiren completamente y seguimos teniendo el ecosistema de matorral casi intacto, por decirlo, o similar a las condiciones originales previo a la construcción. Pero en el caso de los agrivoltaics que están implementando todo el sistema de flores y plantas para las abejas, una vez que se termine la vida útil de estas plantas solares y se retire, la pregunta es, ¿cuál es el plan para mantener estos recursos que son extras? Y si hablamos de 10 años, significa que las abejas ya hacen como una rutina de saber dónde hay estos recursos. Y si una vez que retiramos, claro, los recursos ya no existen. Más o menos han tenido alguna idea de qué pasaría cuando termina la vida útil de estas instalaciones.
The questions about what will happen to the site 25 to 30 years from now when it's decommissioned are not ones that we're immediately addressing. They are of interest to people, especially when it comes to soil health and regeneration. But the more immediate questions are about siting, where a solar farm should go, and if dual uses can be generated. So I don't disagree with you. I think it's really important and interesting to think about what would happen 20 to 30 years from now. But we have a long list of questions that are more related to what do we do now, and what should we be doing kind of routinely year from year while these sites are in existence. I think it's too early to say how valuable a solar farm could be for wild bee conservation or for honeybee keeping. If our data, we're only 2 years in. If after this year we see that the honeybees are just as productive this year as last year, I'll feel more confident about talking to the larger agricultural community about how sites like ours could make one form of agriculture, beekeeping, more productive. And if that's the case, then I think we would get more community support for solar in general. It's not guaranteed that solar energy will be adopted at utility scale in our part of the world. And one of the bigger issues for us is, will any of these practices, agrivoltaics or ecovoltaics, increase the social license for solar developers to operate their sites within our state?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate the caution in your answer. I appreciate the caution in your answer, Matthew, in terms of making broad prescriptions, which oftentimes we as researchers are asked to do after only a few months or a few seasons. And I think part of what we find out west, where there isn't necessarily going to be something growing just because you left the soil alone. In your environment, you're going to have something, and you've shown just how much more positive intentional management of the soils in a solar array can mean in terms of services. And that's exactly the same message I see in coming out of Juan's work. You know, the intentional low impact installation process can mean these additional benefits, not only in terms of reducing that heat island effect, but hopefully increasing that social license for solar development. Looks like we have time for another question from Davis, and otherwise maybe put some things in the chat that Matthew or Juan can follow up with, and then we'll go to Marcia. Davis?
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Matthew, great work, really great. So more about the wild pollinators. I did a little work in Minnesota, and I can tell you year to year, they change a lot. So I encourage you to keep doing more wild pollinators because they change a lot from year to year. And it is something that a lot of states are very interested in preserve. Minnesota is one case of them that they have legislation just to protect wild pollinators. So I would encourage you to do more work on that because you can have a very interesting story in your research with wild pollinators.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. This seminar today was exactly what we had been dreaming of last year. People from across countries being able to converse across languages, different climatic spaces where we can see differences in approaches and similarities in outcomes. And personally, it's great to, in addition to working with Matt on and off over for the last 5 years, to have you presenting here. And Juan, really excellent to meet you and to think about you taking up this new mantle at UNLV. I don't know if you know Stan Smith or knew of Stan Smith, who's retired from UNLV a while back. I guess he's my academic grandfather. When I got into this work like 15 years ago, one of the first papers I found was actually Stan Smith looking at the impacts of solar for desert tortoises. And he was using plywood to get at what the potential shade induced from solar could be out there. So here you are, like 1980s papers being revisited by someone studying micrometeorology and the impacts of ecovoltaics. So it's really fun to watch these full circle moments. Marcia, do you want to wrap us up and tell us about next time?
Bien, muchas gracias a Juan, muy interesante el trabajo, a Matthew, un trabajo de largo tiempo también súper robusto, así que bravo a los dos. Y queremos dejarlos invitados entonces para los próximos webinars. El próximo justamente trata de aceptación social de los agrivoltaicos. Ahí vamos a tener a Ismael Cosme y a Kerry Say Fleming. Así que quedan súper bienvenidos para estos últimos 2 ciclos del webinar. Y acá, Greg, si quieres invitarlos a la plataforma, invite the platform. Oh, yes? Or should I? I can hear you. There is a delay.
You're muted.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, there's just like a 1-second delay. So I was waiting for you to finish talking in English. Yes, and thank you for the reminder, Marcia. We do have this this platform, this website, avsinfronteras.org. And in addition to being able to hear about upcoming presentations, I really encourage all of you to register. As you can see in this example, our dear colleague Christine has done. And you will be able to explore, as you can see in this middle area, network. This can be toggled between English and Spanish, thanks to our web genius, Georgi. But you'll be able to explore a network of others who are interested in, have published in different degrees of involvement in different subjects around agrivoltaics, and really build out your own network by identifying others who may be active in this space. Additionally, there's the archive where you can go back and watch previous presentations. But thank you. Please do explore this network and register. It helps us learn and helps others, people you have not even imagined being able to collaborate with before. The gates are now open to be able to do so. And with that, I will say thank you otra vez. Thank you one more time. Thank you, Marcia, for really leading today and for co-hosting with me. And thank you to Juan and Matthew. And I'll leave the last final gracias to you, Marcia.
Gracias, gracias Greg, gracias a todos y espero que tengan una buena jornada. Hasta la próxima. Chao, chao.